And thanks again for joining us, Lincoln Rose, along with Kit McConnico, Arch Bell. For those of you who missed it, we've already posted our first chat this Memorial Day weekend, looking back at really what Kit and Arch were able to do this past decade, being among the first to help connect soccer fans with the game, regardless of whether there was a pro sports, pro soccer team within the city limits or not, or whether it's just talking about the international game that both grew up to love so much, both in their time growing up here in Texas, as well as both men taking time to leave the country and really experiment the game at full capacity in some great venues before coming back here to Lone Star State. Kit, Arch, again, I'm always fortunate to be joined by you. Often we're calling a live game together. We hope that we're able to do so safely in the near future, whether it be college or at the professional level. But Kit, as the Austin native, apologies to Midland, Texas, Arch. We'll get to you in just a moment. But Kit, some of your earliest memories, you got to go out to check out some of the first professional soccer, I assume your recollection, whether it be the Soccer-Dillos or maybe even the Thunder?
So those are indeed some of the earliest soccer games I remember. I remember when I was very young going out to watch the Thunder, going out to watch Nigel Bowman and his teams play. And as a young player, there was no professional soccer in Austin. And as Arch mentioned, we talked about this in our previous segment, it was very difficult. You didn't get to watch soccer on television. It didn't exist for the most part. So these were my soccer heroes. There was no MLS at this point. I knew nothing about international soccer except for that there was this thing called the World Cup. I was so young. So these were the people I wanted to emulate. I got to go out there and watch them play, and big thanks to them because they would come up to the fans after the games and they would talk to you, and you're sitting here and you get to look up at your hero 5 years of age. And that was what I wanted to be.
That's in the 90s. Really, when we look back at just what Austin alone has done in the past 20 years in this millennium, you look at 2002 when the USL PDL, which is your fourth tier of U.S. soccer. Of course, fans these days will know it as USL League Two, just to confuse you. Their League Two is the fourth division of U.S. soccer. But that's your premier development league. A lot of college players spending their summer trying to up their game, hoping for a professional career, whether it be here in the United States or abroad. And from 2002 to 2007, we see the Austin Lightning just looking for any pitch they can play on, whether it be a county park in Bastrop County, Williamson County, up at St. Stephen's on that high school academy's field. House Park, Burger Stadium would finally be introduced as potential soccer sites, if you can forgive the American football lines. But this is a team, they average about 200 to 300 fans. Again, semi-pro is about as high as you can rank it in terms of the soccer pyramid. But when you guys think about Austin Lightning and just the opportunities this started to create and maybe resurrect the talk of local soccer, what comes to mind? Arch?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that, there was still just such little media coverage. So they, unfortunately, they didn't get too many fans out. But, the guys who were out there playing that would play on those Austin Lightning teams, very much a passion for the game. One local guy who had a lot of success in college soccer, AJ Godbolt, whose father is Bucky Godbolt, who's a local radio personality here in Austin. AJ played at the University of Maryland, won a national title in Maryland. So he was a member of those Austin Lightning teams. As an example. So, despite there really being little professional presence, you still had the area producing some very good players during that time. And, but it really wasn't until the Austin Aztecs came on the scene that you started to see a step up.
Yeah, Kit, the Lightning, they close up shop 2007. Austin, though, is told you're going to get a franchise in 2008 to replace them. Initially, the name was Austin Stampede, very short-lived because not only was Austin getting a PDL side, but Aztecs FC, as we would grow to get to know them, along with a new owner in Phil Rollins. He would come with a head coach, some guy named Adrian Heath, as they would bring what would be a second division U.S. soccer side. This is a USL Pro at the time. It's their top division, second behind only Major League Soccer. But all of a sudden, this starts to really introduce professional soccer to Austin. I mentioned they were bringing back a PDL side. They did have a U23. And this also kind of gives us a development concept here in Austin as well.
You're right. And it was a huge step up. I mean, bringing in Phil Rollins and his experience and what he'd done, and Adrian Heath, I mean, a player of his caliber won an FA Cup. He was a star in the 80s with Everton, and bringing a player, a coach like that who had the pedigree as a player, it was a massive step up for Austin. It was really kind of the genesis, if you will, of professional soccer in Austin. We've seen where it's led, but hats off to them. They saw the vacuum here and they came in.
Arch, that's a team that in 2009, again, they were starting to get their footing, but to help draw the fans, they would average between 3,000 and 4,000 a game, a significant step up from the PDL. But, you know, they called Nelson Field home initially, then later on House Park. They had 3 friendlies with MLS sides over there at Nelson Field. But this is when we start to really see supporters groups start to form and really a love with a local team, a great bond begin.
Yeah, the Aztecs 1.0, the supporters group that they had, the main supporters group, if you will, was called Chantico's Army. You people who aren't familiar with that name might be familiar with the name Eberle's Army. Chantico's Army eventually became Eberle's Army, but in the beginning, Matthew Gray, who's kind of been a mainstay, a stalwart of the supporters groups, he was the one that helped start Chantico's Army, and those guys were loyal supporters. They were there at every game, helping create a great atmosphere, and I mean, they would travel sometimes to away games. So I mean, they had their own Aztecs podcast, Chantico's Army podcast as well, where they were following. They would talk about the Aztecs. They would talk about the rest of USL Pro. So I mean, they really did their part in trying to infuse some passion and they would, I remember there were things like a samba band at House Park for one of the games, and you'd have like these little. There was one time there was a promo, and I think they sold out House Park. I think they had 6,000 fans for one of the games, and so you had like a full house at House Park, if you will. So there were really some great moments during those 2 years. They had one of the games in 2009 on Fox Soccer Channel, and the Fox Soccer Channel would show USL Pro. All the fans had to sit on the side of on the east side of the Nelson Field bleachers because so the optics looked a little bit better on TV that there were fans, even though it was like 103 degrees in the middle of July. But there were some fun moments. There were some great moments, and especially playing in House Park where you could go to the tavern, you could have a couple beers, and then walk to the game. It was I have very fond memories of going to those games.
Yeah, everything really seemed to line up there, especially in 2010, before they would learn that it would be the final year of the Aztecs in town. Because there, you mentioned you had the tavern, a local favorite, just down the road. The fans could then march to the stadium, which has a beautiful view of downtown Austin. And again, just a perfect atmosphere for soccer, whether there's football lines on the field or not. It just seemed to really all click together. Phil Rollins, we mentioned the owner, had his ties to Stoke City. You think, well, maybe there's going to be a long-term bond here between the city of Austin and that club overseas. Again, the leadership of Adrian Heath as your head coach. And Kit, this is a team that in 2010 really saw some improvement. They finished second and would make it to the quarterfinals.
Oh, they were outstanding in 2010. That was a wonderful side. And you combine the few local players, and they had talent from all over. And you had a coach to the caliber of Adrian Heath, and really he was able to put his mark on that team. You mentioned the venue, your historic House Park right there at 12th and Lamar. You're in downtown Austin. You have the skyline in the background, a beautiful venue, centrally located. And things were aligning. The stars were lining up. You had the facility. You had the product on the pitch. And for right then, everything looked great for Austin fans. But little did they know that was going to be short-lived.
And one quick story about Adrian Lincoln, and Adrian was great. Like, he would come on Football in Vivo and visit with us. He always loved to talk tactics or just talk about his past experience and just talk about the team. But I can remember one time he got thrown out of the game, and instead of leaving the stadium, he just went to the other, sat on the other side of the bleachers, what would have been the east side of the bleachers there at House Park. And I mean, I just remember the sight of Adrian Heath just sitting there all by himself in the bleachers at House Park, basically trying to give indications to his assistant coaches about what to do. And so Adrian was a wonderful head coach to have for the team here in the city. I mean, just a great character. He would hang out with the fans after the game. So with the players, you could sit and have a beer with this English football legend after these Aztecs games. And I mean, it was a lot of fun. He was such a great coach to have in the city.
Well, despite all the success there in 2010, the problem with forming a true love affair with a local team in your backyard is you set yourself up for heartbreak. Of course, Phil Rollins would soon announce that the team was headed to Orlando, talks that they would be a better fit for Major League Soccer. Of course, now, all these years later, we've learned that, well, both sides were right. Orlando City SC, of course, became Major League Soccer City. And, of course, we'll find out in 2021 that, yes, Austin is, in fact, a booming Major League Soccer town as well.
Yeah, and one thing about Phil Rollins, he was another person in the early days of Football in Vivo. He would come into the studio and visit with us, and to his credit, he envisioned a soccer stadium in Central Austin that would double as a concert venue. I mean, I remember him talking about that in late 2009, early 2010, and now the fact that vision of his is going to be coming to fruition a little bit more than 10 years later. It just kind of speaks to, what he was hoping to accomplish, and it was just maybe a little bit too early, but now we see that it is going to be realized. But yeah, when the, late October, really over the course of a weekend, and a lot of, the fans were blindsided, there's still some bitterness there, but Phil was able to eventually get his Orlando team to MLS. That was his objective. I think, whether it was Austin or Orlando, he was really driven to get his team to MLS, and he saw Orlando as the best path to do that.
So Austin is without soccer on the men's side for 2 years. They would go back to the PDL side, but there was still some value in that branding of Aztecs. Of course, the emphasis on the ATX, every other letter for Austin. And Kit, they come back in the PDL, but this isn't the same PDL experience. This is one that still has that support. Everly's Army is craving a team to cheer for. Back comes David Markley, who was a partner in the previous Aztecs group. He's your primary owner of this PDL side. They're back at House Park. You're back to marching from the tavern, and you get all those feels. A great first year, 2012, even better, 2013, all this under head coach Paul Dalglish, son of King Kenny. It culminates in their 2013 national championship.
They did a fantastic job. Paul Dalglish coming in, obviously, he was being around those Liverpool sides growing up and being around, related, the son of one of the great players of all time and an MLS player in his own right, and Manuel Buenteo, his assistant coach, with their local ties. And to me, they did a fantastic job bringing in local talent, and they made that a local team. It wasn't just an attractive brand of soccer. They scored a ton of goals. They were fun to watch, but it was local kids doing it. And you look at the guys up front. I mean, for a while there, it was Kyrie Shelton, who's a Vista Ridge product, who played at Oregon State and now in Major League Soccer. Chris Tierpak, who everyone knows here in the Austin area, Dripping Springs finest. And then you look at Kekuta Mena from Lake Travis, who's also a Major League Soccer star. That was your trident. That was your attacking three up front. I mean, that was as local as it gets. And this is a team that was scoring 5, 6, sometimes 7 goals a game with local kids.
Yeah, Lincoln, it was a fun – that 2012 season was – it was so much fun to watch, and just to go out to the House Park on Friday and Saturday nights to watch that team. I mean, it was such a – I mean, not, lack of a better term, it was just such a romantic watching experience. It was very pure, very authentic, and just the way Paul had those guys going. I mean, just the way they attacked, and yeah, you had such a great infusion of youth. And I want to say, I guess it must have been the 2013 MLS draft. I think like 3 of the top 12, or either top 10 or 12 picks, had played with the Austin Aztecs, and so. I mean, that was a huge source of pride. The fact that in just in their short history, the Austin Aztecs were already making leaving a very large footprint on MLS.
Again, over the years, we saw lots of great Austin talent, but if they were going to climb the ladder, they were going to have to leave town. But this provided a launching pad for some local guys. You mentioned Chris Tierpak. That won't be the last mention of Chris Tierpak. Even in the home opener there in that first year back, 2012, he puts a hat trick on his resume to really delight the fans. And really, it was great to see this Aztecs team reward the fans who had been longing for their return and not disappointing them. Again, we mentioned Tierpak would go on to be your MVP in that national championship. He would then go to Chivas USA in their final year of Major League Soccer for his rookie campaign in MLS. But ultimately, you could see momentum and you could see the gears working, and how can we continue to build on this? And while the PDL side would come to an end in 2014, it's not because there was an absence of soccer. It's because we were back to pro soccer here in Austin. You can call it Aztecs 2.0, whatever you want. Same colors as the PDL side. But all of a sudden, 2015, House Park is rocking, at least early on. They had the benefit, great venue downtown. We mentioned the sight lines. But frankly, it's a business. Beer sales is a big part of that. You're at AISD where you can't have those alcohol sales, but you have this unique neighbor where they get permission to have a little beer garden. So fans at halftime can step away from the pitch, go just across a curb, grab a beverage, watch a little coverage on TV, then come back into the stadium. It was really a perfect marriage there at House Park until, well, ironically, on this Memorial Day weekend, 5 years ago, were the Austin floods of Memorial Day kit. And that ultimately would really, and I feel bad because the first words were put a damper on all this, was they would have to go out to Round Rock because that field was underwater.
You're right. And it was incredibly unfortunate that a natural disaster was the only thing to derail them. They had all the momentum from the previous season, the success. You had the local players. They'd made the connection with the fans. They were able to have the beer garden. Everything was looking up. They had everything the way they wanted it. And then all of a sudden you have the Memorial Day floods 5 years ago that completely, it put the pitch underwater. There was water all the way up to the bottom of the football goalpost. It destroyed the pitch itself. It was impossible to play on, so they were forced to find another venue. Ultimately, they elected to move up to Kelly Reeves in Round Rock, but that was difficult because one of the great things, probably the best thing about House Park, is where it's located. You have that great location. Everyone from every corner of Austin can come there. It was more difficult for the fans from South Austin. Many of them still made the trip, but they had to figure out a way to cultivate a new fan base up in North Austin and Williamson County. They did a very good job of that, but it just seemed that what they had going at House Park, it was always going to be hard for them to duplicate at Kelly Reeves.
They did their best having shuttles go up there. You and I, before we went on to this chat, were just thinking about, this is just one season that this team exists in 2015. Again, Aztecs, at this time, the USL is still the third division. That's because the North American Soccer League has the monopoly on second division. Of course, MLS still the top of the pyramid. But fans were just excited. The return of pro soccer. It's a year that kicked off with some MLS friendlies. They played them over at Meyer Stadium at Texas. Of course, a little bit of irony here. The Columbus Crew would come to town, and we would find out that this team would have a bond with Columbus in the sense that they would have some players on loan. Kalen Ryden's the primary young man that comes to mind who really suited up regularly for the Aztecs during this stretch, the Oklahoma talent. But when you think about just how that season started off so promising with the MLS friendlies, I think it's hard to not talk about what was on the line when DC United, FC Dallas, and Columbus came to town. And that's the greatest trophy in the history of sports, and that was the armadillo with the holsters.
Without a doubt.
That got the attention of everybody. It was I remember ESPN FC, one of my editors there, they reached out to me and said, "Can you do a story on this?" And I said, "Of course. This will be one of the easier ones I've ever done, I guess, because we're talking about a trophy." And the teams were really keen to win it. I know DC United, they were very intent on winning it. Kit, you spent a lot of time with DC United head coach Ben Olsen that week, I know, and the fact that he had a gunslinging armadillo, it was very, very unique. DC United, obviously, when they won it, it was a big question whether they were going to take that to Costa Rica with them for their, because they had to go play a CONCACAF Champions League game. I think in the end, it ended up not going to Costa Rica. So who knows if it would have made it through customs or not. But yeah, it was that trophy was, and then you saw just the viral reaction to it on Twitter and on social media outlets. People Absolutely love that trophy, Kit.
Credit Jeff Burns, Aztecs Director of Communications. It was his brainchild. I've spoken with Jeff about this numerous times, and that is definitely his coup de grace. I mean, coming up with that, I don't know how he did it. I don't know that he ever needs to tell anyone, but you're right. I spent some time with Ben Olsen that week, and the normal questions, preseason tournament. And he says, yes, this is preseason tournament, but we are going to win this because we want that trophy. And he was very upfront. He wanted that trophy. They wanted to bring that back, and they did.
Arch, there's a little bit of irony again in all of this, or perhaps full circle if you want to phrase it that way. Columbus Crew forming a bond with Austin, and perhaps it's really the first great chance for Anthony Precourt and his front office to kind of get a look at the Austin soccer scene.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the crowds, if I remember correctly, for the ATX Challenge were very good. A lot of people came out to Myers Stadium. It was in February, and it was a really good weather weekend in February. And it was kind of like a round robin tournament, or basically, you had the winners of a semifinal, and then there was a third place game as well. So it was a chance for Anthony Precourt and the Columbus executives, or the ownership group, to kind of size up the reaction. And I think they saw what was a very positive reaction, and just, the possibilities of having a type of soccer place, a soccer location in the downtown Austin area, or the central Austin area.
And Kit, before we wrap up 2015, the Armadillo, though it was the star of the trophies, wasn't the only trophy on the line for Austin that year. Of course, they actually captured the first Queso Bowl, the supporters groups. You had the Crocketeers in San Antonio. You had Everly's Army in Austin. This was the first year that both Austin and San Antonio had professional soccer at the same time. San Antonio had the second division side in the North American Soccer League, the Scorpions, really just about an hour drive down 35, while Austin had this new Aztecs side. And Austin actually got the better of that exchange.
They did, and they not only got the better of that exchange, they won the U.S. Open Cup match against San Antonio as well. So bragging rights all around for the 5-1-2 over the 2-1-0 that year. And really, that's one of the great things about sports is rivalry. And to have that rivalry between the two teams just an hour apart, it was fantastic. It added to both of those teams tremendously. And the Queso Bowl, thankfully, still in existence.
I mentioned we're going to throw in the name Chris Tierpak a few more times, especially with the club that we're about to move on to here. But just a little bit of trivia that I'm sure Chris would like to forget. It really was no fault of his own, a brilliant career up to this point. But this is a young man who goes from being the MVP in the PDL. He's a rookie in MLS for Chivas USA until they closed their doors. He used that as an opportunity to come back to the Austin Aztecs 2.0. Has the season with them. They close their doors. Now the USL season wraps up a month before the NASL. So he goes down to San Antonio, a team they beat in the Queso Cup, to play for the Scorpions that final month. Well, all of a sudden the Scorpions closed their doors after several years of success, including an NASL title. Of course, they would ultimately give way to the second division side in the USL, owned by San Antonio Spurs the next year in 2016. But the next time we'd hear from Chris Tierpak would be 2019, because that's also 4 years later the next time we would hear about pro soccer in Austin, guys. When the Aztecs closed because they couldn't find a new home in 2015, mind you, Round Rock just was not an option. It's another school district venue, and because it's a business, they could not get the revenue that you need from the alcohol sales, as we've now learned that alcohol to go is an essential business, of course, in these trying times. But, Austin – and you feel for Everly's Army and all these teams that stuck with it, going from the first Aztecs to Phil Rollins to this new breed of Aztecs under both David Markley and then his newer partner, Rene Van de Zandt. But that was really some trying times between 2015 and 2019 when soccer, again, there was a void to fill here in Austin.
It was down times for Austin fans. There's no two ways about it. Austin, they'd already seen one team taken away from them or moved away, however you want to look at it, with the Aztecs 1.0. Then all of a sudden they'd reinvested with the Aztecs 2.0, and that team is gone. And there wasn't a team on the horizon, let alone two teams. And for a long time there, Austin fans didn't know if there would be another professional soccer team in Austin, and if that was going to happen, when it was going to be. And so the fact that there is now one and two professional soccer teams soon to be in Austin, that was a pipe dream. And Austin fans were having to go to San Antonio to support a side or having to go to Houston or Dallas to watch major league teams. It was very difficult times for soccer in Austin.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, Lincoln, that you also have to take into account there were people who had been living in Austin a long time and had been involved in soccer in Austin a long time. I mean, they're just so fatigued. They're just tired of just the in and out and just the lack of stability. I mean, Jens Busch, who we all know is the leader of Austin Blues, the Chelsea supporters group in Austin, and I mean, the guy is just tirelessly always getting people together. I mean, he was always having Chelsea fans out to the Fado Irish pub back in the early 2000s and stuff, and still to this day is the leader of the Austin Blues, and he's been he's been involved in Austin soccer for a long time, whether it's the Austin Men's League and then all the way through Austin Blues. And I remember him saying to me one time that it was hard for him, and I'm sure a lot of others felt this way, for them to get personally invested, because knowing that 2-3 years later it might not be there. And so, to summon up the energy and be like, okay, let's go Aztecs, let's go whatever. It was, it just exacted a toll, and you could see how people would get disillusioned.
Again, the big problem with trying to get soccer back in Austin was having a soccer-specific stadium. That had plagued, for the past 20 years, every PDL side, semi-pro, third division, and everybody who even thought about bringing soccer to town. Arguably, it's why one team would ultimately leave and head off to Florida. But finally, we would learn that with the USL prompting the ownership of what were the Aztecs, that, look, you either need to exercise your ownership, which you said you were going to close up shop after those floods for maybe a year and then come back. That didn't happen. A little ultimatum was put out there, and what would be the Austin Bold, owned by Bobby Epstein, of course, in Circuit of the Americas, they said, we've got a tract of land here. We're just going to create our own solution. They come up with Bold Stadium, a beautiful venue, fantastic. Yeah. And this is a team that last year opened up shop. Of course, we would also learn that Major League Soccer by this point was going to come to town in 2021 at the time, learning that in all likelihood would be the start date. But the Bold would push forward. Kit, you and I had the chance to call several of those games last year for the Austin Bold. Again, fantastic venue, soccer-specific pitch. We get to watch soccer with no American football lines down there. And it's in that unique venue, Circuit of the Americas. And this is a team at the time, general manager Roberto Pinto da Silva. This is a team doing something that a lot of the USL isn't doing, and that is giving out 3-year contracts to a lot of their players, trying to build long-term. And that's also allowing them to attract some talented veterans and maintain some consistency from one year to the next.
You're exactly right. And the three of us have known Roberto since his time with the Aztecs. And when the Bold came online, even before they started playing, I had the opportunity to speak with Roberto, and he mentioned that to me. He said, this is not going to be a fly-by-night operation. We are not a 1 year in and out. We're going to build this soccer-specific stadium. We're going to build it as best we can, and they did. It was a fantastic facility, a great pitch, everything top tier there, so hats off to them. But to give 3-year contracts, which is unheard of in most of USL, brought in a lot of top talent. It brought in players that had played for national teams. It brought in players that had come from MLS, guys who said, if I have a 3-year contract, I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to move my family here. People that wouldn't have done that on a 1-year contract. They wouldn't have taken that risk, and it's paid off. They had great success in their first year. They went further than any Austin team ever had in the U.S. Open Cup. They really set the bar, and unfortunately, as we've seen time and time again, and this is it's a terrible thing. We saw it with the Aztecs. We've seen it with the Bold. They've been unable to capitalize on their momentum, no fault of their own, but the Bold, because of this pandemic, their season now in jeopardy.
Arch, this is a Bold. We mentioned they're in the USL, but it's a different level. Soon after the Austin Aztecs 2.0 would fold, U.S. Soccer would grant USL the right to move up to the second division. So briefly they're coexisting with the North American Soccer League. The difference is there's a lot more teams in the USL. So even if 1 or 2 teams fold or 1 or 2 are promoted to Major League Soccer, you still have this critical mass. And I think that proved to be the difference and being able to survive, while the NASL, we would see shut its doors. Some of those clubs have since joined what's now known as the USL Championship. But Arch, what were your thoughts seeing last year, the first year of the Bold, and just the quality, the resumes of the players who are taking the pitch down there?
Yeah, I mean, you have a guy who played in the World Cup final who was on the Austin Bold squad. It's in Brothide. Am I saying his name right, kid? Is that it? Or Lincoln, you would know that too. Guys who played in Copa Libertadores, guys who played in Champions League, and then mixed in with local guys like Chris Tierpak and then Sonny Guadarrama, who Sonny is an Austin native, but it's been his career down in playing in the Mexican League, and was finally back in his home city playing, and it was a really big deal for him. And so yeah, it was great. They were a very good team, fun to watch. And I really like the facility out there. I like going to games. Every seat's a good seat, very intimate, soccer-specific stadium. I mean, the Canadian women's national team trained there in January prior to the CONCACAF Women's Olympic Qualification Tournament. So an excellent facility in that. And I mean, every seat was a good seat out there. And once you got out there, I mean, sometimes it could be kind of a haul to get out there from certain parts of the city, but once you got out there, it was very pleasant, very nice. And, just being able to watch a level like that and to be able to enjoy it with your family I really liked that experience.
Kid head coach Marcelo Serrano, now in his second year as the head coach, but here's a guy who, with all of these impressive resumes, you imagine there's some egos, and yet somehow he puts them all together, and these guys are absolutely cheering for one another and willing to put one another ahead of themselves. We saw that culminate in pursuit of 3 trophies for the Austin Bold. This was a team that boldly stated they wanted to win the U.S. Open Cup. They would have a nice run, but ultimately come up short when they would fall to an MLS side. They did capture Copa Tejas as the USL Championship featured teams in El Paso, San Antonio, down in Rio Grande. Austin actually fairly handily able to capture that trophy. And you could see just these guys who had won various titles throughout their career, just how much it meant to win something together.
And that's impressive. And it speaks to, as you said, Coach Serrano and what he's been able to do. He has a great resume coaching youth national teams, both here in the States and his home country, Brazil, also the national team coach of the U.S. Virgin Islands. But when you talk to players, you talk to guys like Cleverly Gladiator, you talk to guys that have played in Champions League, or Edson Brothide, who I've been fortunate to get to know over the past year and a half, who Arch said played in the World Cup final in 2010 when the Netherlands lost to Spain. And you talk to these guys that have played at the very pinnacle of the game and say, why are you here? Why are you playing in Austin? And their response is unanimous. It's because of Marcelo. He brings players together. It is a family environment. They want to be here. They want to play for him. And he's able to get them to put egos aside. And we've seen the result on the pitch. They play well together. They enjoy being together. And doing that in a sport like soccer, where you have guys that have played at the highest level, that is incredibly difficult and very impressive what he's been able to accomplish.
The Bold would ultimately average about 2,000 fans, for the most part a different fan base than we saw at the Aztecs, a big part of that, the location. But they were able to tap into, obviously, a market that Major League Soccer would love to tap into around the outskirts of Austin and that region along the way. But this is a team that was defending its home pitch for much of the year, was looking to be a top 4 seed in the West before perhaps age was catching up to them near the end of the season. A little bit of fatigue. They would wind up being the 8th seed in the West. They almost knocked off the prohibitive favorites, Phoenix Rising, out there, who were just on a fantastic winning streak. They would go and play 120 minutes, go to a shootout. Ultimately, the Bold would see their first ever season end in the quarterfinals. Again, they did return here in 2020 before the pandemic kicked in, guys. But this is where we are with soccer here in Austin with, of course, we're all looking forward to 2021 now for many reasons. We are hoping that soccer is back, both with the USL Championship, but of course, everybody has the dates next spring circled for Major League Soccer as Austin FC and all of the noise we've been hearing from the surrounding community, excited about a major league town, all of a sudden, Austin, Texas, soon to come. We will be talking about the potential that Austin FC will bring here to the capital city, as well as some of the untapped resources and what both Kit and Arch have been able to observe during their time here in Austin, what they expect in the near future for the growth of soccer in our third and final segment. As guys, great to have a chance this Memorial Day weekend to catch up with you. Want to let our viewers know again, if this is the first segment you're watching, go back and we remind you of some of the great unique coverage that Arch and Kit have had over the years, whether it be print media, on the radio, or on TV as well. Guys, as always, appreciate your time. Look forward to joining you for one more segment as we look forward to Austin again for the first time having a major league franchise in its backyard.